Ladies and gents, brothers and sisters, today you're about to hear something different, something real. Not sugar-coated, not written for textbooks, but straight from the ground we stand on. Before there was Union Buildings, there was Church Square at central Pretoria.
In the dawn's early light, we gather as one under a rising sun, with ancient wisdom passed through the ages. In the heart of the bush, our story engages.
Church Square was the seat of power. Our speaker is none other than our chairman. Here at South African Journey, Chris Kanyane, a storyteller, a truth digger, and someone who's been watching closely how history is told, and more importantly, what's been left out. He's not here to bore you with big words. He's here to shake the dust off the real story of this country. At the South African Journey, we do not theorize from armchairs. We investigate the soul of ideologies. We travel. We do not read fiction and propaganda. We demand original texts. We test ideas against human experience and suffering. We clear the fog. We reject mainstream media narratives. We document the soul of a nation. We expose the lies, the slogans, and the ideologies that harm South Africa. We defend you. Here, we arm the next generation with clarity, dignity, and a fearless mind. If this mission speaks to you, if truth matters to you, help us keep the fire burning. Click the link below and buy us coffee. I will surely appreciate it. The chairman is going to take us back to where it all began. Not the Union Buildings, not the flags and suits, but Church Square. That humble place, shaped like an African kraal, where the early Afrikaners unknowingly built their dreams on African ideas. But as they found themselves, they also lost sight of their neighbors, looking down on the very people who inspired the heart of their settlement. This talk is not about blaming or preaching. It's about opening eyes. It is about history. It is heritage. Yes, Church Square is heritage. What you will hear is about understanding how deeply we're all connected, both white and black, even when history tried to separate us. So whether you're from Pretoria, the Platland, Soweto, or the suburbs, this message is for you. Because South Africa's future depends on us telling the truth about its past.
The African soul beneath the stone. Before there was the Union Buildings, there was Church Square. And before the towering seats of state power in South Africa began to mimic European grandeur, there stood this modest but potent space. A square that, in its quiet structure, reveals the deeper African soul of Pretoria. Church Square is not merely an architectural relic. It is South Africa's original state house. If we are to borrow from the American language, the White House of our early civic imagination. But unlike the intimidating symbols of imperial might, Church Square carried the rhythm of the African cradle. Look closely. At the center of the square stands Paul Kruger, his statue projecting a fatherly, almost paternal presence. Not unlike a tribal elder seated at the heart of the homestead, surrounded by huts and life. Around him radiate the vital organs of civic life: courts, banks, post offices, public offices, much like the traditional Bantu kraal where granaries, gathering spaces, family homes, and decision-making huts formed a spiritual and communal circle. This wasn't accidental. The Afrikaner, in their long journeys across the veld, had rubbed shoulders with the African way of life. Whether in the bushveld or savanna, their architecture and social structure absorbed, consciously or not, the ordering logic of African settlements. Church Square reflects this mutual encounter. It is not a monument of dominance, but one of unintended harmony. Its circular humility resists the pomp of palaces and statehouses. It breathes with the African ethic of modesty and spiritual centrality. Even amid the historical collisions, colonial ambition, native resistance, political power, and cultural estrangement, Church Square stands as a monument of something far deeper: the underlying unity of humanity, a shared order, an unconscious merging. In this square, battles may have brewed, but so too did the faint echo of universal kinship, something older than conflict, truer than race, and more eternal than politics. Let the modern South African pause here, not just for photos, but for reflection. For before we argue who belongs and who doesn't, before we divide again by slogans and skin, let us remember. The square that first housed our public life was already African in spirit, and it still is. Church Square, where Afrikaner consciousness was born, and blinded before Union buildings crowned the hill, before the Republic raised its flags, there was Church Square, humble, circular, organic. This was not just the civic beginning of Pretoria, it was the crucible where Afrikaner consciousness evolved. Here, in this African-shaped square reflecting the kraal of the Bantu, the early Afrikaner spirit began to define itself. After generations trekking across veld and savanna, encountering the rhythms of African life, the Afrikaner began to yearn not to be British, not to be ruled, not to be erased. The desire for volk, for self-determination, for sovereignty flared into a fierce identity. Church Square became more than architecture. It became a psychological border post between colonial submission and African immersion. But in this fierce awakening, a blindness also set in. The Afrikaner, so obsessed with pulling away from the British shadow, forgot what stood beside them. Absorbing African ideas unconsciously, settlement design, community centrality, patriarchal leadership, they paradoxically failed to recognize the humanity of the people whose systems they mirrored. They saw African counterparts not as fellow nation builders, but as ants, many, busy, invisible in value. The square may have been inspired by the kraal, but its designers claimed it as a European invention. This is the spiritual irony of Church Square. The Afrikaner built his civic identity atop an African blueprint while refusing to see the African soul within it. It is a story repeated across the continent. The colonizer who borrows and denies, the settler who imitates and rejects. But South Africa's destiny is different, because here everything is fused. Afrikaner, Bantu, Khoi, English, whether by blood, soil, or soul, this land has made them overlap, not by force, but by fate. Church Square remains. A reminder that even the fiercest bid for selfhood cannot escape the echo of the other. And perhaps if we stand in that square long enough, we will hear what history whispers. We are not enemies. We are entangled. Afrikaner awakening. Church Square truth. African origins. Creole consciousness. From Creole to Kruger. Entangled destinies.